The night had fallen like a heavy curtain over the small town of Cedarville. Neon lights flickered faintly along Main Street, reflecting off the wet pavement where a few late-night wanderers wandered aimlessly. Inside, the Rusty Anchor, a local bar that had seen better days, the warm amber glow of the lights clashed with the coldness outside. Laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint hum of a jukebox filled the air. The bar was a sanctuary for some, a hiding place for others, and tonight it would become the stage for a story no one would ever forget. Behind the counter, a young waitress moved briskly. Her name was Mia. She was barely 21, with hair tied into a practical ponytail, her uniform simple, yet her presence radiated a quiet strength. Every step she took was measured, careful, almost rehearsed. Life had taught her to move softly, to avoid drawing attention. She had been working at the Rusty Anchor for nearly a year, saving every penny for her ailing mother, whose health had declined sharply over the past few months. She bore her burdens silently, hiding exhaustion behind a practiced smile, serving drinks and stories without letting the weight of the world show on her face. The bar door creaked open, and instantly the room's atmosphere shifted. A group of bikers entered, heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. The sound was like an omen, and the regular patrons instinctively grew quiet, sensing trouble. The leader of the group, a towering man with tattoos crawling up his neck and face, scanned the room with a predatory gaze. His leather jacket, worn and cracked from years of use, carried an air of intimidation that was impossible to ignore. Mia felt a prickle of unease, but she didn't let it show. She had faced difficult customers before, but there was something about this group that was different. Their presence was raw, almost violent, and it drew the attention of everyone in the bar. Conversations halted mid-sentence. A glass fell and shattered, yet no one moved to pick it up. It was as if the room itself held its breath. The leader approached the bar, his boots scraping the floor with each step. He leaned over, and his eyes, dark and unforgiving, locked onto Mia. "Hey, pretty lady," he sneered, his voice low and dangerous. "A drink. Make it quick." Mia nodded, her hand steady even though her heart raced. She poured him a beer, sliding it across the counter. "Here you go," she said softly, avoiding his gaze. But the man wasn't satisfied. A smirk curved his lips as he reached out abruptly, tearing at her uniform shirt. The fabric gave way under his fingers, ripping with a loud tear that echoed through the bar. Gasps filled the room. Patrons froze, eyes wide with shock and fear. The jukebox stuttered, as if the music itself had stopped to witness the injustice. Mia stumbled backward, her hand instinctively covering herself. Her cheeks flushed, not just from the humiliation, but from a lifetime of carrying burdens that no one could see. Her eyes glimmered with tears, yet she refused to let them fall. The room went silent. Then it happened. Something no one expected. Where the biker had torn her shirt, there was a scar, long and intricate, stretching across her shoulder and chest. The mark was not of injury, not of abuse, but of survival. A look of horror and realization spread across the biker's face. He froze mid-motion, his breath catching as if he had just glimpsed a truth too powerful to comprehend. Mia's voice, trembling yet steady, broke the silence. "You don't know me," she said softly, her eyes meeting his with a mix of defiance and vulnerability. "You don't know what I've been through." The bar, which moments ago had been filled with fear and tension, now felt suspended in time. The scar told a story no words could fully capture. It spoke of a past filled with pain, courage, and survival against odds that most could not imagine. Some patrons recognized it immediately. Others stared, trying to piece together the invisible threads of her life. The leader of the bikers swallowed hard. His hands, once so confident and threatening, trembled slightly. He stepped back, his posture crumbling under the weight of realization. The men behind him shifted uneasily, their bravado faltering as the truth settled over the room like a heavy fog. Mia took a deep breath, her trembling fingers gripping the edge of the counter. "I work here to take care of my mother," she said quietly, her voice gaining strength with every word. "Every night I serve strangers and hide my struggles because I have no choice. And yet, I still face people who think strength is measured by how much fear they can spread." The biker swallowed again. his face pale now, as if the ghost of every harsh word he had ever spoken haunted him in that instant. I didn't know," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the stunned silence of the bar. "You didn't know," Mia repeated, softer this time, almost like a whisper of forgiveness. "But now you do." The entire bar seemed to exhale simultaneously, releasing the tension that had gripped it moments ago. The patrons, once frozen with fear, now looked at the scene with a mix of awe and respect. They had witnessed a moment of raw truth, a revelation that stripped away pretense and power. It was no longer about intimidation or strength. It was about humanity. One of the older regulars, a man who had seen too many fights and too many nights like this, muttered under his breath, "That girl. She's stronger than all of us put together." His words, simple yet profound, hung in the air. The biker leader stepped fully back, his leather jacket now seeming like a costume for a man who had just realized the fragility of bravado. I'm sorry," he said, his tone unsteady. "I didn't mean—" He trailed off, the words failing to capture the weight of what had just occurred. Mia nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement. She didn't need to hear the apology fully. It was in the silence afterward that understanding was communicated. The scar on her chest was a story of survival, resilience, and the quiet battles that people like her fought every single day. And for the first time that night, the bar saw true strength. The bikers, sensing the gravity of the moment, began to retreat. They left quietly, their presence now diminished, not by force, but by the humbling reality of truth. The rusty anchor returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed forever. Patrons whispered among themselves, sharing glances of newfound respect. Mia, though shaken, stood taller than she had before. Her courage had transformed the fear in the room into a silent, collective admiration. The jukebox, once interrupted by the chaos, resumed its soft hum. Glasses clinked gently, and life continued, but the night had carved an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. For some, it was a lesson in compassion. For others, it was a reminder that appearances were deceiving, and judgment was a dangerous luxury. And for Mia, it was a quiet affirmation that her strength, born of hardship, love, and survival, was unshakable. In the days that followed, the story of that night spread quietly through Cedarville. People spoke in hushed tones of the young waitress who had faced intimidation with courage, revealing a story that froze an entire bar and humbled even the toughest of bikers. Mia continued her work, her smile still gentle, her hands still steady, but now, somewhere deep inside, she carried the silent knowledge that truth and resilience could command respect more powerful than fear ever could. And the Rusty Anchor, once just a simple bar on a rainy main street, became a place where stories of bravery, empathy, and unexpected revelation were remembered for years to come. The morning sun broke over Cedarville, casting golden light across streets that had known hardship and hope in equal measure. The Rusty Anchor, usually quiet in the morning, stirred with early patrons, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint aroma of fried breakfast, filling the bar with the comforting rhythm of routine. Yet beneath this ordinary start, something extraordinary lingered in the air. Mia arrived early, as she always did. Her uniform, freshly pressed, reflected her meticulous care, but it was the quiet determination in her eyes that shone the brightest. She moved behind the counter with practiced precision, refilling sugar containers, straightening menus, and greeting the few early regulars with a soft smile. But in the back of her mind, the events of last night played over and over like a film she couldn't stop watching. The memory of the bikers, their intimidation, the tearing of her shirt, and the revelation of her scar still clung to her like a shadow. But alongside it was something new, a sense of empowerment. She realized that in a single moment, she had transformed fear into respect, judgment into empathy, and silence into understanding. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a small, private smile. Patrons began to trickle in, one by one. Whispers followed her, soft and reverent, as if they were speaking of a hero rather than a waitress. Some older men shook their heads in disbelief. She didn't have to stand there like that, one said quietly to his companion. And yet she did, and she changed something. Mia, focused on her work, barely acknowledged the conversation. But inside, she felt a warmth she had not known in a long time. It wasn't the validation of words, it was the realization that strength often lies in the quietest acts. She didn't need anyone to praise her. The bar itself had witnessed her courage, and that was enough. But the story did not end with quiet admiration. By mid-morning, the Rusty Anchor's phone began to ring incessantly. Local newspapers, intrigued by whispers of a dramatic night, called for statements. Social media was already buzzing, with photos and messages spreading the story. Waitress's bravery freezes a bar of bikers. Scar of survival silences intimidation. Mia's heart raced, not with fear, but with the overwhelming reality that her private struggle had become public. At first, she wanted to hide, to retreat into the comfort of anonymity. But then she remembered the look on the biker's face, the moment he had truly seen her. And something inside her shifted. This was not about humiliation. It was about truth. She agreed to a small interview, her voice calm, yet carrying the weight of her journey. "I've faced hardships," she said quietly, her eyes meeting the reporter's camera with honesty. "I work to support my mother. I've learned that life doesn't give you control over what happens to you, but it does give you control over how you respond. Fear and intimidation are fleeting. Courage and integrity, those last forever." The interview went viral within hours. Messages of support poured in, from people who had faced abuse, illness, and judgment, to strangers inspired by her bravery. Mia read each one silently during breaks, feeling a mixture of humility and awe. The world, it seemed, had a way of recognizing truth, even when it was hidden beneath layers of struggle. Meanwhile, the bikers themselves were grappling with what had occurred. The leader, once a symbol of fear, now faced a quiet reckoning. He had returned to his gang, speaking in hushed tones about the young waitress who had shattered his assumptions. She showed me something I never understood," he admitted, his voice tinged with awe. The others, still reeling from the silent weight of the revelation, nodded in agreement. The experience had humbled them, forcing a confrontation with the fragility of power and the permanence of courage. Back at the Rusty Anchor, Mia continued her day. She noticed subtle changes. The patrons treated her with newfound respect, not pity. Small gestures, a smile, a kind word, a tip left on the counter, reminded her that courage inspires more than just fear. It creates connection. One of the older regulars, Mr. Thompson, leaned across the counter. "You've taught all of us something important," he said. "Never underestimate someone and never measure strength by appearances alone." That evening, the bar filled again. It was quieter than the night before, but the tension had transformed into warmth, almost reverence. Patrons watched Mia with genuine admiration, but she remained humble, moving with grace and purpose. She carried the scar not as a mark of vulnerability, but as a symbol of resilience. Then, as if fate had scripted it, the biker leader returned, alone this time. His leather jacket hung loosely on his frame, but his demeanor was different. Gone was the arrogance. In its place was a quiet respect. He approached the counter slowly, his eyes avoiding the gaze of others. "I wanted to say," he began, his voice unsteady, "that I'm sorry, truly, last night. I didn't see anything but what I wanted to see, but now I understand." Mia studied him, her expression unreadable. And then with a small nod she spoke. "Understanding is the first step. The second is change." He nodded, a gesture of humility and acceptance. And in that moment, the bar, a place that had once been a stage for fear and intimidation, became a place of reconciliation, learning, and quiet heroism. Word of the incident spread through Cedarville like wildfire. People began to speak differently, to consider the struggles that others carried silently. Mia's story became a lesson whispered in schools, shared in community centers, and told in hushed tones in homes. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to stand despite it. Weeks passed, and life at the Rusty Anchor returned to a comforting rhythm. Yet something subtle had changed. The patrons treated each other with more empathy. The community became more aware of the hidden struggles around them, and Mia, well, she carried herself with a quiet pride. Not the pride of boasting, but the pride of knowing that in a single, pivotal moment, she had transformed fear into respect and judgment into understanding. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, Mia paused behind the counter. She looked at the scar on her shoulder, tracing its delicate lines with her fingers. It was a reminder of pain endured, battles fought, and lessons learned, and she smiled, a small, private smile, because she knew that strength. True strength lies not in intimidation or power, but in courage, compassion, and the ability to touch hearts without words. And so, the story of Mia, the waitress whose scar froze an entire bar, became a legend in Cedarville, not because of spectacle or sensationalism, but because of the humanity it revealed. The rusty anchor remained, as it always had, a quiet refuge. But it had become more than that. It had become a symbol that even in a world filled with fear, misunderstanding, and cruelty, the human spirit could rise, inspire, and transform lives in ways no one could ever predict. And in the end, Mia's courage did more than silence a group of intimidating bikers. It inspired a town, taught a lesson in humility, and reminded everyone that what we see on the surface rarely tells the full story of the strength within.